with that, I'm going to transition over to Jim Zemlin. So as you all know, Jim Zemlin's the executive director of the Linux Foundation. And one of the fortunate viewpoints he's had in his tenure here is to see not only Linux Foundation start from zero to where it is now, but also the 350 plus projects in here start from zero to where they are now. And he's here to share some insight and strategies for success. So Jim, take it away. Oh, Jim, you're on mute.
Voila.
Now you're back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Just I want to start right off. Yes, I have COVID hair. It's been a while since I've seen all of you or really anyone. But I look forward to someday seeing you again in person soon. I thought I would just walk through and do a little retrospective. It wasn't too long ago where we were all sitting in the Academy boardroom, and it was at very early stages. All of you were excited about the prospect of creating an open source community in your industry, and I think it's been pretty impressive to see how many gains that you've made in a relatively short period of time. And I'm not talking in Hyperledger years, I'm talking in Linux Foundation years, which are just much longer than, although Brian goes back all the way to the Apache Software Foundation, so he can relate as well. You've created and are home to some really good projects. I think that your leadership on being an inclusive an organization and community that promotes diversity is important. And certainly the last year has tested all of us in terms of the amount of hardship in so many industries. And I think yours was disproportionately impacted. So it's been impressive to see the progress even in the face of that hardship. To compare to the Linux Foundation's first few years, you're killing it. I was still trying to convince my now wife that I had an actual real job in the first few years of the Linux Foundation. We had a data center where we were providing access to big two-way machines so that Linux developers could harden the platform, which we ended up pretty much selling on eBay a few years later as all of that technology became accessible on people's laptops. And then obviously we ended up moving to cloud computing, where you have sort of infinite network storage compute available theoretically. We were fighting some tough battles around legal provenance as it comes to open source. Back then there were copyright claims on the kernel. We learned a lot from that and have built a whole structure around reducing intellectual property risk within our communities, and all of the resources around that, whether it's guidance on how to manage licenses within an open source community, contribution agreement infrastructure, to more advanced things around patent no-fly zones, and so forth. We've done a lot of work, and all of that's available to all of you. I remember telling a ton of Microsoft jokes. We don't tell those jokes anymore. They're an important part of our community. But I think the most important thing, and this is something that all of you could mimic, is, the biggest thing I was tasked to do was to create momentum around open source and Linux as the future of technical outcomes in pretty much the entire technology sector. Back then, Unix and Windows were really the dominant platforms in computing, and our idea was to create a sense of inevitability around the technology of Linux and open source. Technology is an implicit futures contract. If you choose the wrong platform, you choose the wrong programming language, you end up with very few opportunities and very little support in the long run. In some cases, sort of having to go on your own. I think all of you have been faced with making tough technology decisions, and maybe a few years later saying, really wish I hadn't chose that. And so what we wanted to do was create that inevitability, which created a big flywheel around our project in terms, in this case, Linux, in terms of participation, in terms of an ecosystem of commercial providers, and then commercial reinvestment back into the open source project. Fast forward to many, many, many years later, and this year we're having a tremendous, really our best year ever in terms of the first couple months of 2021. We just cracked 2 million trainings. I'm going to talk about how you can all take advantage of our training infrastructure. We're adding a new member a day at the Linux Foundation. In fact, we're adding 1.8 members a day, so almost 2 new members a day across our projects, 2 to 3 new projects a week in a wide range of industry sectors. Just this week, we launched initiatives in cybersecurity, initiatives around open source projects around racial justice, and much more. We have a bunch of projects on tap to announce in the next few months. In fact, one of those projects is in an adjacent industry to yours. We're working on a 3D engine open source project. And if any of you are interested in that particular initiative, feel free to reach out to me. That's a more gaming sector specific project. We have done new self-sovereign identity efforts. We're working on 5G networking technology, from the very low level radio all the way on up, and so on and so forth. So just an amazing start, and it bodes well, I think, for all of us and for the Academy Software Foundation being a part of the Linux Foundation to take advantage of what we're doing here. The thing that I probably presented to all of you 3 years ago holds the same today, in that one of the things that we want to make sure is that these projects get used to create real products and services. I choose projects, products, and profit just because I like the 3P ring to it. But your projects are used to make your products, which are great films, incredible effects, and then you're able to reinvest some of the resources from succeeding in your industry back into these open source projects. And the critical part of this cycle is it not only creates economic sustainability, but more importantly, it creates an innovation feedback loop. You really are the innovators when you're working on some new interesting way to create visual effects. And if the more you feed those back upstream, the more you will be forced to innovate on the next project and the next project and the next project. And those who are unafraid of sharing and always raising their innovation bar and really creating this flywheel are the organizations that succeed. One of the things that we've been working on lately is when we look across all of our innovation communities, the scale is tremendous. We host 27,000 meetings a year at the Linux Foundation. Our chat groups are sending millions of messages. We're exchanging millions of emails across all of these projects. Just in a given year, we have at least 200,000 developers from 12,000 companies contributing to the collective set of Linux Foundation projects. Remember, our projects, although limited in number, and we have about 16,000 repositories compared to the 25 million, let's say, on GitHub, these are the projects that are of most import to industry and society. They're projects that are impacting the energy sector, your industry. In cloud computing, projects like Kubernetes have become the de facto computing platform for that industry. In the automotive sector, our automotive grade Linux initiative is in millions of production automobiles. We recently did some work with Harvard to try and answer the question, what are the most important shared software initiatives in the world? And when you really measure it, it gets down to, not millions of open source projects, but to really thousands. And these are the thousands of projects that we all depend on. And in your industry, there's a unique set on top of just sort of core operating system technology we all need that's open source, but a unique set that are applied in the visual effects industry to all of you. One of the things, and I'm gonna try and show you a video here. One of the things that we're doing is creating tools to help enable collaboration with minimum overhead. And I want to show you some of those tools, and I want to encourage all of you to take advantage of them. One of the things I heard earlier in the discussion was the idea of, okay, how many projects can we bring in to the organization and plausibly support those? My mission is to make it as easy as possible, as seamless as possible, as automated as possible to do all the things you need to do to get a project up and running so that you can really focus as many of your resources as possible on that innovation component of the effort. So I want to show you this
open source
right now.
Is everywhere.
See if you can hear it.
Whether it's powering the public cloud or enabling autonomous cars, open source is fully entrenched within the global software supply chain. But let's face it, building and maintaining an open source project at global scale is a lot of work. In order to successfully scale a project, you need both great code and tools to help you drive the increasing demands of daily operations. Insights into who's contributing and what it takes to supercharge your project, and the resources and expertise to engage your community and drive adoption. Wouldn't you rather spend less time on things like debugging, marketing, and admin work, and more time building amazing tech? As the trusted home for developers to collaborate on and scale open source projects, we at the Linux Foundation are here to help. We've taken decades of experience working with some of the greatest developers in the world to build a proven methodology that helps projects scale from open source repositories to game-changing technologies, and rolled this into a holistic self-service toolkit called LFX. From monitoring project health and community engagement to facilitating project funding from around the world, LFX is here to help you focus on what you do best: innovate. LFX arms you with complete visibility into your project and insights to influence growth, the means to establish a security posture that builds trust with your community, and the tools and framework to foster community through mentorship programs, events, and training. Not to mention empowering you with a range of other tools for managing code contributions, community participation, license agreements, and more. Put your open source project on the fast track to long-term growth and sustainability. Get started with LFX today at lfx.dev.
All right, so go check out LFX. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here on the strategy suggestions, but we're rolling this out right now. All of these tools are available to all of your projects. I think that your organization has already started using our Easy CLA tools. I believe that the Insights platform is being rolled out. But I want to just sort of walk you through some of the really interesting technology that you're going to see later on this year. And I'll caveat all of this by saying, be patient with us as we roll these tools out. We want your feedback. Not everything's going to work perfectly the first time, but we have a whole team dedicated to making these work for your community. On Insights, what you're going to see in our next version is a much more DevOps-focused view into your community. That'll give you a sense of how you're performing as a development collective versus what an average or what a well-functioning open source project should look like in terms of mean time to pull request resolution, in terms of security scanning around vulnerabilities within those projects, in terms of the diversity of committers within those projects, in terms of your entire CI/CD pipeline where you may have bottlenecks in that process. You'll be able to gain access into visibility on whether or not an individual maintainer might be a bottleneck, and think about whether or not you might want to reorganize the structure of that project in order to create better development velocity and more. And that's just one module. in the security module, what we're asking all of our projects to do is to have a better security stance by enabling them with a few new tools. Dynamic and static code analysis tools. We provide a aggregated version of Sneak, which just this morning raised $300 million for their security tooling, which was offered free to your organizations in these projects and will only get better. We're also integrating new technologies around code secrets so that we can make sure that we proactively, if one of your developers, puts some AWS credentials in a repo and it leaks out, we're going to catch that. Later on this year, we're going to have a version 2 of our mentoring platform that will enable you a very seamless way to pair mentors and mentees in your community, bring people from diverse backgrounds. We'll pay for mentees in those programs from diverse backgrounds. We'll have task tracking, matchmaking, and a whole bunch of functionality that'll make that easier. Finally, we're going to have a few things in our project control center that will also be rolling out later this year. Think of this as a way to provision for every project your chat channels, set up a website, set up an entire CI/CD system, whether it's Jenkins or GitLab or GitHub. It'll allow you to set up mailing lists. It'll allow you to set up social media channels, to provision all of the things in hours that usually take weeks and sometimes months for your projects to grow. All of that's coming. I encourage all of you to take advantage of it. If you want to learn more about LFX, just hop on to lfx.dev or just reach out to me or any of my team and we can get you in touch with the engineers who are working on all of this. So I want to finish here by just giving some thoughts over what you can think about in the next 3 years. I think one of the things that is important to remind folks, and I think Rob said it earlier, is, hey, should we think about X or Y? We've got all the right people here in the room. Ultimately, that's an incredible strength of this group, is you really do have the right people here in the room. And so I would be bold in your thinking because it is actually very, very difficult to get the right people all in the same room. I assure you, we've worked very hard in various different industry sectors, whether it's energy providers or the financial services sector. But once you get everybody in the room, great things can happen. I would continue to try and bring new projects into your portfolio. I think that Brian mentioned earlier, there's some pitfalls with maybe pseudo-competitive projects coming in, or maybe you're concerned, you're taking on too much. But just in my experience now, where we have over 680 projects at the Linux Foundation, not only is it important to sort of let organic innovation happen, even if that includes some failure, but we've got your back in providing you the tools and know-how to be able to let those 1,000 flowers grow without overwhelming you in terms of logistics. I would look at expanding into standards. I think that there are lots of requirements for industry specifications. The Academy has done already great work in this area around standards, and we now are poised to help you even more. The Linux Foundation, 3 years later, is one of the largest standards development organizations in the world through our Joint Development Foundation. We host efforts like the Alliance for Open Media, that's adjacent to your industry, but we also host many, many more. We have status to create international standards through our ISO PAS submitter status. We have 2 internationally recognized standards around software bill of materials and license compliance. So this is something that your organization can take advantage of, and I would consider you to be ambitious in how you could leverage that. I think you can do great work in building a pipeline of new talent into your industry by taking advantage of our training infrastructure. We have an infrastructure that can help you make massive open online courses on edX, skills-based certifications where a proctor can test somebody through a webcam and you watch them actually do technical work to make sure they know how to do it. We can build self-paced e-learning programs for you and much, much more. Somebody mentioned earlier, creating some way to share information on how to share IP in your industry. I think you can build custom courses based on the already existing open source program office classes that we have. But I would be ambitious here as well. Don't even, I don't know that you even have to limit yourself just to open source. I mean, if there's just an area where you need talent and skills development, and it aligns with what we're doing at the LF, we'd be willing to create those courses with you, and we can do it very fast and in a very cost-effective way. I think continuing to promote diversity within your industry is critically important. Just this week, we launched 7 new open source projects around equity in racial justice, things like our open sentencing program, some things like our racial language removal program, and much more. We will support you in those efforts. I'm willing to underwrite in particular mentees if you want to set up a mentoring program to bring diverse candidates and teach them how to work in your world. We really believe in that at the LF. Our own employees mirror that, and please don't be afraid to ask for our help. I put this last couple things in here to say, somebody was asking, should we hire people to do unique work? If there's some kind of bottleneck or there's some unique talent, if there's a Linus Torvalds in your world, I mean, he obviously works for the Linux Foundation, Greg Hartman does, we employ test engineers and much, much more. That's something that I wouldn't be afraid to do. I think the main thing you don't want to do is, be on the hook for what a software company might provide in terms of, 24/7 support or some kind of SLA. I don't think that works quite well in an open source organization, but it's not mutually exclusive. You can hire people to do interesting development work as long as you're not just essentially becoming a software company. And then lastly, and I said this before, get the mentality of being unafraid to contribute innovation to the commons, because the most innovative developers and people, love it. We did a survey with Harvard late last year and asked them why they participate in open source. And I assure you, money and career was at the bottom of the list, and that the top was, mastering one's craft, recognition amongst peers, the act of creativity. I think all of you can relate to that perhaps more than others. And so be unafraid to push the boundaries, to contribute code that, in many ways, people all think their stuff is super special. It's really the most special innovators that are willing to continually contribute to a commons and then innovate even further on top of that. So I encourage you to do that. So with that, I can stop here and answer any questions. Hopefully I didn't go too over time here.
Oh, this is really insightful, Jim. This has been great. Anybody, if you have questions, we definitely do have a few minutes for anything. Just take yourself off mute.
Well, I want to say thank you, Jim, for being here and presenting with us. And I won't prevent other people with questions, but it's not necessarily known to everyone how much you have helped us in setting up the foundation at the beginning when we were looking at what to do with this set of problems that we had, and we had a very narrow focus on a few things, and you came in and opened a world of possibilities to us, and your support throughout setting up the foundation, and all this experience that you've gathered over the years is a big reason why we're here today. And what you bring to us in a moment like this, a glimpse of all that you're doing at the Linux Foundation, it shows us many new paths that we can take in our own industry. So certainly I want to say thank you for being there since the beginning and for being there with us today. It's really good.
Thank you. Yeah, I please encourage all of you to take advantage of the infrastructure we're laying down for all of you. I'm just a huge believer in, organic innovation, and I think the more that you can enable seamless integration through a lot of this automation technology that we're building, the better innovation outcomes you're going to have. And I'm just, it's incredibly satisfying to be able to work with an industry like yours to try these tools out. And, Rob, on insights, we want to move it from who's working on what to, how good are you at modern development practices? How can you benchmark efficiency? How can we take all of our communities and move them into that DevOps world and provide as seamless an experience as possible to do that?
Absolutely. Some of the earlier slides I think Kimball was sharing was pulled right out of LFX Insights. So you're already seeing the work right in there. And I know, Rob, you've commented on those before as well.
Yeah, I'm probably harder than anyone on the Insights team on like, hey, let's define what metrics are core. Let's get great visualizations on how to do that. And so I'm very excited and chomping at the bit to roll out our second version of it that will be much more, I think, actionable in terms of what you can get out of those analytics.
Awesome. Any other questions from the group here? And I think there's a couple that have came through just in the chat. I don't think questions, just Andrew Pierce just saying how helpful and informative this was. And then Larry, I think last year somebody said something to the effect of, this organization has only existed for 2 years and we can't imagine how we ever got along without it. And we are more true right now. So that's really thanks to the hard work of all of you in the developer communities. You're the one who makes all this happen. So there's no other further questions. Jim, thank you so much for joining us and taking time to participate in this.
Yeah, thanks to all of you.